Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Farough. I am the editor-in-chief at GameDaily.biz. You might notice that this is GameDaily Connect, so I run the website and the editorial arm. I am here with a bunch of scary, scary journalists, but we're gonna try not to be scary today because we're not actually that scary. And we're gonna kind of walk through what it's like to work with a journalist, how to pitch us, what to expect, what we don't like, how to annoy us. Oh, wait, no, how not to annoy us. But I want to introduce my panelists first. I'm going to go down the line and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I put their names up there so that you can see who they are, what they do. Oh, it's a very good picture, Nan. It's okay.
Yeah, that is a good picture, buddy.
Yeah, there's some good pictures up there. So I'm going to go down the line. I guess you should have your microphone back.
Oh, I get the microphone back.
This is Mike.
Mike with the mic. Hi, my name is Mike Futter. I am the author of the Game Dev Business Handbook and the Game Dev Budgeting Handbook. I am also a freelance writer. I write for GameDaily.biz. I wrote for Variety Gaming before Variety decided it wanted to get out of gaming. Pouring one out. I've written for Polygon, Mashable, a couple of other outlets I can't put my finger on right now.
You're the former news editor.
Oh yeah, I'm the former news editor at Game Informer. Also pouring one out for half of my old team. So it's been a rough week for journalists, so thanks for coming to our panel.
We're going to try not to cry.
And I'm Dan Ackerman. You may know me from the last 14 years or so at CNET. Since we're talking about books, I'm also the author of a book called The Tetris Effect, which of course is a history of the world's greatest video game and how it was stolen from the Russians, and they didn't like that.
Hello, I'm Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. Been writing about video games for about 23 years and tech for about 29 years. And GamesBeat is part of VentureBeat. We also do a lot of AI coverage. We have an AI conference called Transform. And I run the GamesBeat conference that takes place April 28th, 29th, 2020 in LA.
Hi, I'm James Brightman. I also write for Game Daily and work with Amanda and Mike. Used to be the EIC on GamesIndustry.biz, which is a UK publication, been covering the industry a long time. Not quite as long as Dean, but been covering the industry for almost 2 decades. And yeah, should be a fun panel.
We're going to try not to cry. I'm going to try not to cry, let's be real. So I want to talk about game journalism in brief. So probably all of you here know what game journalism is, but you probably don't necessarily have a perspective on what we believe game journalism is. So I'm going to go down the line. I want to make sure that all our panelists can talk to us about what game journalism has been to them in their careers and how they see game journalism today. So we're going to take a minute, maybe 30 seconds. Brightman, we're going to start with you, man.
Sure. Well, to me, I think it's pretty simple. I think it's probably true of a lot of journalism. It's just kind of exposing the truth. You know, you want to examine the trends, but really look at what's the truth versus what's the perception. You know, I come at it from the side of business, not consumer journalism. So we're not, you know, I've barely written any game reviews or previews or that sort of thing, but looking at what's, you know, actually going on at a company, what's actually the story of games development, you know, what are the developers facing in today's environment. That's really what the journalism is really about. It's just kind of telling stories. That's kind of the heart of it is, you know, what's the story to tell and what's the truth behind that story.
Can I just agree to that and just leave
You
it
can.
at that?
That's okay, Dean. You don't have to add anything more if James stole your answer.
You know, representing the consumer side of the reporting business, I always think of it as there's no such thing as games journalism. It's just journalism, and we happen to be doing it about game hardware or interactive entertainment. It's the same as if you're talking about movies or pickup trucks or anything. The same general principles apply, and the same general storytelling and journalistic skill set applies. And I think the more we hew to that and say we are reporters first and games, technology, interactive, whatever people second, rather than saying we're games people who happen to be writing about games and maybe next week we'll be doing something different, I think that is what we should all aim for.
Well said.
My perspective is a little bit different than my colleagues on the stage. This is my second career for a number of years. My background is in nonprofit arts administration. I have my MBA. I have worked in finance for nonprofit organizations. And it was as that career was winding down because I was in development, and I started, especially after the financial crisis in 2008, it got really hard to ask rich people for money because they wanted to hang on to their money. And then I worked at a very large organization in New York City, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. And at the same time, I had an opportunity show up to start with an all-volunteer site. And I started to find that I could take all of these things I understood about business and apply them to this love of video games that I have. And because I've come to it more recently, one of the things that I was always hungry for knowledge. And I've always tried to pass that on to my readers. So I write a lot of explainers. My goal in writing is typically to break down complex subjects and make them digestible for people who don't know anything about business so that they can engage in a conversation that they might not otherwise be able to.
Excellent. I'm not going to share my
Can
perspective.
I actually dive in and yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
I
So
was
Dean's got stuff
thinking
to
more
say.
about like what we're not, and we're not fake news, and
I appreciate you saying that.
we're not influencers.
No, we're not. We'll get there.
And we're not, and I think that means the distinction there is that we're not directly paid by the sources of our stories for doing those stories, and that the monetization is much more indirect than being just paid shills, I guess. So
That's true.
there's actually a dwindling number of us in the game industry,
Yeah.
because I think the other models for paying influencers are very successful right now.
You mean when you can pay people to say nice things or at least not say negative things about your
Wait a
product?
second. We have a slide for that.
Oh, snap!
So, as journalists, no, we won't let you pay us to write nice things about you. That's not how we work. So, that's just kind of like the very pointed end of this discussion about what journalism, as Dan put it.
Is it worth talking about the general pipeline for how companies work with influencers versus how they work with journalists, just to get an understanding of?
We can maybe talk about that if we hold court outside.
Sounds good.
So if you want to know the differences between working with an influencer versus working with a media outlet, you can come find us outside and we can talk to you guys about that. All right. Now, the salient question: how do you get a game journalist to write about your game or your company? This is
easy.
a hard
You just
one.
email them every day, 3 times a day, find
Dan,
their phone
this is a
number,
terrible
find
idea.
their
I don't
home
like
number.
it. No, I don't like it.
Writing that down right now.
Don't do that.
About your email.
I have his email. I can do that.
I'll start that off, I guess.
You absolutely should. Yes.
Sure. So, we get inundated with pitches, which I think you have a slide for as well. But anyway, the key thing from the PR perspective, or even if you're just a game developer doing PR for yourself and kind of trying to get our attention is, understand what we're trying to do with our publication. Understand what the publication is actually about, because I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten pitches from people who clearly have no understanding about what it is we do as journalists. And, they're talking about like,
He's talking about the next slide already. That's so good. So proud.
it's
of him.
like, can we, be featured in your holiday guide? It's like, well, we don't write holiday guides because we're a business publication and we're actually writing about the business and the development of games. And so it's like, do a little bit of basic research about the publication before you pitch it. And then beyond that, just have like a really, hopefully very interesting story to tell, whether it's something personal, some new game concept that's been created in a new way that maybe other developers haven't done, and then that gets our attention, and then we want to dig into that and possibly conduct an interview and actually tell the story. But obviously, just like everyone else, we're very busy and we can't accept pitches for everything. So research
But we'll
followed
get
by
there.
something that's really interesting to present to us is kind of the first 2 steps.
Absolutely. Thanks, James.
And I say that as somebody who has sympathy for PR people. They're asked to create, magic out of nothing a lot of the time. And, I appreciate it if you're trying to email 300 people and you can't research everyone's beat and website and exact coverage areas. But what you can do is open up your email or your pitch with a couple of very very strict things at the very top. Tell me the name of the project, the product of the game, the release date, where I guess for game, the platforms, the price. If there's some sort of announcement date or embargo, make sure that's there in a standard. Don't send it to me in Central Time, Mountain Time. Eastern Time is great. If you want to put Pacific, you can do that also. And just have that stacked at the top so I don't have to read any, words to get the, important stuff that I need to make that flash decision.
Along those lines, when we talk about research, we talk about kind of connecting with a journalist in a cold email. There are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. One of the wrong ways is to go and just look at what the last thing that person wrote about and say, hey, I loved your coverage of X. That's why I think this would be a great idea for you. It's like, A, these have nothing to do with one another. B, I'm pretty sure you didn't read this scathing thing that I wrote about somebody laying off 100 people. And then you've connected your project, your pitch to me writing about layoffs, which...
That's happened.
Yeah, it
That
happens.
happened
It's
after
really
the
weird
Activision
when
layoffs.
it does. Yeah.
That wasn't good.
So I guess I would also just remind people that there's different levels of story that we do, and you have to decide how ambitious is your pitch, I think. And if it is an announcement story, I do these things called embargoes, where I agree to run a story at a certain time. You can send it to me a couple of days in advance, or sometimes a week in advance or more. And plan out the story, do an interview for it, and it publishes at a certain appointed time that we agree upon. That's called an embargo. I do a lot of those, but there's sort of a limited ambition to what you can do with that. In some ways, that's we're rewriting press releases, which is just sort of the bare bones of what we do. And I think when you're getting more ambitious, you're thinking. What is just fundamentally interesting here? And I had a conversation with a game developer, and she was, showing me her game, and she said, "Yeah, I learned this while my mom was working at EA." And then I had to sort of stop her and say, can you talk about that more? Because that kind of makes you sort of like a unicorn in this industry, the daughter of a game developer from EA making her own games, like as a second generation game developer. And
That
to me,
doesn't
that was
happen
just
very often.
far more interesting as a story. And so, when we did that story, we did that interview, we'd mentioned the game, but the big piece of the story, or the heart of the story, was just about her and her mother.
I want to kind of bounce off something you said. You talked about embargoes, and there's a lot of misconception about embargoes. We actually like embargoes. It gives us plenty of time to understand what it is, ask questions, do those interviews that we might want to do. Embargoes are useful not just to developers and publishers when you're trying to promote something. It gives you that beat, right? Everything's going to hit all at once. A lot of previews, a lot of reviews, a lot of industry news that you're looking to highlight, yes.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it means that you can send it to, you can let us know that we have a week, and we can do an interview 3 days before, and we're still not rushing to get something out the door. We know that we're not crunched for, and we'll talk about media crunch later, but we're specifically in this case not crunched for rushing a story out and not having all the details we might want to add. So embargoes are good. Do consider them.
Except we do get grumpy when we've got 10 embargoes scheduled for a Tuesday, and we don't get to do any of the other stories that we like to do.
That is true. Amanda, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yes.
There's a stat that you have been mentioning a lot lately. We're going to get there?
We're
Okay.
going to get there.
I
It's
spoiled
okay.
it.
I know exactly. Spoiler alert. We're going to get there. The final word on this is do your research. Even if you're only doing cursory research, do your research about which bucket an outlet will fall into. We have B2B outlets, like most of the folks on the stage here are B2B and business writers. We have mainstream consumer and mainstream tech and mainstream gaming. Do your research. Don't pitch us stuff that isn't going to fit within our outlet's audience. That's that situation.
And
I'm going to give you...
To clarify, GamesBeat actually does run reviews, and I do reviews, but most of my coverage is business-oriented, and we have a review editor, Mike Minotti, and
Mike's great.
most of his coverage is review-oriented. So we kind of bridge both business and consumer.
I'm going to give a little bit of advice that is counterintuitive, and I bet no one else here on the stage will agree with me. This is my unpopular opinion.
Oh, no.
If you email me and I don't get back to you, or you think I didn't see it, you know, you can email me again. It's fine, because I'm looking
That's
right
not
now,
unpopular.
and I have.
I feel this way.
Oh, people say don't keep emailing me.
No, email me twice.
Good. Because I'm looking right now, and I have 179,131 unread emails in my inbox.
I'm so upset with your phone right now. That's an upsetting number.
I've just given up. And if you call me, the best thing I ever did was turn my office phone basically off. If you have that number, you call it, it just says, this mailbox is not monitored. Don't leave a message. So just
All right,
email me
then.
again. It's fine. I won't be
It's
offended.
Little journalist life hacks. Okay, so I want to talk about the difference between sponsored content and a pitch for regular coverage, because we all deal with advertorial at our jobs, and we have seen it at our jobs. So, who wants to start by talking about advertorial?
I'll start us off.
All right,
So
do it up.
I think first and foremost, a journalist is never going to write advertorial. Like, you just have that separation, church and state.
no.
And there needs to be someone on the team who is not on the regular editorial staff who will write the sponsored piece or the advertorial. If PR comes to a journalist and that journalist is asked to write, you know, a quote-unquote sponsored piece, it's just not going to happen. Not at, you know, most respected publications. That's just not something that's allowable, and that's what the separate marketing team is for and what the marketing budget is for. You know, journalists are not interested in being turned into, you know, shills for a company. And so there has
Mainly
to
because
be.
we have to criticize that company at some point, and that's going to look awkward.
So there has to be a hard line in the sand, and we cannot cross that line.
Yeah.
That goes, you know, we see this in the consumer space a lot, because you'll see, oh, you gave that company a good review, and that's because they have a full wrap on your site. They've
Those
bought
are
out all
teams.
your ad inventory for the week. It's like, we had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah, those are different teams. There's a difference between a sales team and your editorial team, especially on larger outlets.
Yeah. And at the same time, you'll have this weird thing that happens where readers don't understand. Well, like, you have a full wrap. You're promoting this game that you just gave a 5 to. It's like, again, no control over here. That's a completely different department. And when everything is working as it should, there's a firewall. And that's what we call it. We call it the firewall between
firewall.
editorial and marketing.
Yeah.
Or ad sales.
And yeah, the better publications put sponsored content on every sponsored post so that you know it's sponsored.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just proper disclosure. So that's the difference between pitching for actual coverage and pitching for sponsored content. You can pitch us anytime, but do your research first, for regular content, but you have to talk to our sales teams in order to get any sponsored content on our sites. All right, let's talk about what we value in pitches. Whew, I think we already kind of did this. I mean, part of it is understanding what our ethos and approach to.
I'm going to give a bookend to what Dan said.
Sure.
Give us a TLDR at the end of the email.
Put it at the beginning.
Put
it at the beginning.
Put the
Give us an
TLDR
abstract.
at the beginning. Put it again at the end. You know, put it in 2 places. That's fine. There are a couple of agencies that have been doing emails really well recently. Evolve PR with their terminal system.
Yeah.
They all have a similar format. You recognize when they come in. Oh, this is
Evolve
Tom's
email.
team that's pitching me on this. Sega and Atlas have a very consistent format as well, with all of the important details on the right side
Yeah.
of the email. So I would not recommend sending plain text. I've started getting. I don't know if it's a new agency. I've started getting a lot of plain text emails, and it's just, there's nothing in there that pops. We see so many emails. It looks like, is this a personal email? Is this a PR pitch? And I'm talking like literally like no bolding, no italics. It's just like someone, hey Mike, how you doing? Yeah, it's a wall of text. So there is some design. There are some design needs that need to go into attracting the eyeball of a journalist who sees hundreds, thousands of emails a day, a week. You know.
It's true. And part of this is,
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. I can't,
I'm sorry,
Dan,
next time
I'm
I'll send my
having-
pitch via
I'm having
teletype.
anxiety about this. All right, so the fine point on this is what worked years ago with all of us and all of our various careers. It falls flat with today's audiences. So let's talk about the harsh reality. We only have 5 more minutes to talk about the harsh reality of journalism. So if you guys want to come and have a chat with us out there about what we deal with on a regular basis, let's talk about this. Here's the spoiler alert, family. Muckrack reported last year that there are now 6 PR people for every journalist. It's probably worse in gaming. There are a lot of games, a lot of studios, a lot of companies that want play, and rightfully so, everyone should be pitching. But full-time staff positions are rare. They're constantly in flux. Our budgets have shrunk, our resources are limited, and time is a luxury that we just don't have. Editors and reporters can't take as many pitches as they'd like. So let's take a couple of minutes, let's go down the line, and let's talk about Media Crunch.
Sure. I think there is this pressure that we put on ourselves, like, oh, we want to cover everything that looks good to us. We want to cover everything we think is valuable. We want to tell those stories, right? And a lot of times that, whether it's internal, like, oh, we have these 10 embargoed things we need to write. Dean, you do this sometimes. I used to do it when I was news editor at Game Informer. I wrote 20-something stories today. It's something that was like, oh my gosh, we were so productive today, but also, holy crap, that's maybe not super healthy if we're starting at like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning and we're going until
9 o'clock at night.
9 o'clock at night, which are days that I used to have when I was working at Game Informer full time. And, we want to cover everything we can possibly can. We know what our audience is like. There are some things that are just a flat no because we know our audience won't be into it, but there isn't enough time in the day to cover every single thing we want to.
No, I'll also say that I just did a panel before this where I was talking to game publishers about how data-driven they are. And I think that especially anyone who covers any sort of technology and games fall under that, we're all very data-driven as well within our organizations. So we keep a really close eye on what the trends are, what types of stories perform well, what formats perform well, which ones don't. And frankly, just straight product stories, product X, here's some information about it. Those are out of vogue right now. I think what we're looking for in terms of things that will appeal to audiences are X versus Y, or here's why you should buy this and here's why you shouldn't. I think anything with a consumer hook to it has more of a chance of doing well. Anytime you compare different products or different games, that has a better chance of doing well. So we may be interested in what you're talking about, but it may not be for its own standalone story. It may be information we bank and bring in later when we want to do one of these crossovers or roundups or versus stories or anything like that.
Sure.
So we're not just picking stuff out of a hat. We're driving against data goals ourselves, and we have to justify our decisions. So a lot of the time we're picking the things that will get the most basically eyeballs, uniques, most time spent on the site, whatever our metric is per story, rather than volume.
Yeah.
I try to cover a lot of companies, like from the credo at the very beginning to the exit, and that's sort of like expresses my interest in sort of the human side of games. That it starts with just a few people and it turns into something huge at some point. But what runs against it is that there's so many sort of turns of the screw in between for those companies, and the smaller turns of the screw we just have to give up because there's just too many stories to do for every company. So we may not cover the same company every time and in the same way that we did at the very beginning. And I still live for those stories though, when I can cut out for a week or more and just focus on the one story because it's such a good story. And those are few and far between, but I live for them.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time, but to add on to what Dean said, I mean, it's really about prioritization. I mean, especially when your budget is severely constrained, and that's often the case with a lot of publications today because media is not in great shape. So, working with Amanda every day, we have to, look at what the stories that are out there on any given day and really, really prioritize what's going to stand out in the industry and what's going to be most important to present to the industry. And those are some hard decisions to make. And so if we don't get to something on one day, and if it's still important, maybe we get to it another day. But the key is to really kind of dive into that story and find the truth, as I was saying earlier, rather than just very quickly reporting on it and regurgitating the same kind of press release that's been out there all the time. But, you have to make some hard decisions. And unfortunately, when you don't have, a huge staff, that forces you into those kinds of situations. So it's just the reality of media today.
It is. There were a couple of the other things that we were going to talk about, but we had such a meaty conversation that I'm not going to talk about them. So if you want to talk more about the harsh realities of journalism, what it's like to work with a journalist, and why we are not scary, you can come find us outside. But if you have any questions right now, we have a few minutes before we're going to break for lunch.
Hi, thanks so much. I just joined Jam City as head of PR. I haven't been in gaming in many years, so I definitely have to do my research on the industry again. I just came from Dollar Shave Club, which is a direct-to-consumer brand, and we completely stopped doing press releases. And what I'm seeing in gaming now is that cranking out press releases. From your point of view, are press releases in gaming still an effective way of communicating, or do you prefer one-to-one pitches?
Yes. I think that especially for Game Daily, if we need a wrap up of what the heck is going on, a press release is really helpful because it gives us our bullet points about what we need to be touching on in the story and any questions that we might have that come from that story. It's more valuable to come to us with one-on-one pitches, but I'm not like, don't fully devalue a press release, especially on the business side.
Yeah, especially if you front load a lot of that key information that we were talking about, then I can forward it to someone else on the team or in my organization who might need that information or might find it interesting, or frankly just needs a contact at that company. I can go, oh, what was the last press release? Let's look at the bottom, there's your contact info. So it's a bit of paper record keeping for us.
Yeah.
And press releases and or fact sheets just prevent really dumb errors from happening.
Yes.
Yes.
I would also quickly add just that the one-on-one kind of pitch situation is sort of complementary or supplementary to the press release. I think they're both good ideas, especially if you have a personal relationship with that PR person or with that developer, and you realize that they're not going to waste your time if it's a pitch that's a personal pitch from them, and you know that person pretty well. It can actually be helpful.
But to be clear, we get some of these press releases that are so early stage. It's a company announcement, but they're not announcing any projects, right? And they're not willing to do any interviews. In that case, the one-to-one pitch doesn't, if you're not willing to give us anything more than you're going to put in the press release, I'm not sure that the value of the one-on-one pitch is. If you're willing to offer an interview or you're willing to dive deep on a specific angle, absolutely.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, my name's Luke. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how you decide whether something is newsworthy or not.
That really depends on the outlet.
I know it's going to be different based on the audience. So, but are there any commonalities or any guidance you guys can talk about with your personal approach to that? What are the things that you look at or the consideration points?
Okay, go jump in, guys.
A couple things that stand out to me. I'm always looking for the delta. So if there is something that is a big change from the way things were done, something that's innovative, something that's new, that's one big one. And I had another one, but somebody else go.
I would flip it around and just ask you, what's the significance of this story? Why do more people care about this than just the one company?
Yeah.
That's
the question I asked
you.
Yeah, if it's trend-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously it's sort of the more dramatic, the bigger the numbers involved, like if you're talking millions of users or thousands of users, there's a big difference there, or the amount of money involved, all those things sort of factor in.
And I would just add, I would ask two questions. Is it super interesting and super valuable to the industry at large? And or does it tell some sort of personal story that's very captivating? And if it fits into one of those buckets, then the odds are it's something that we might want to look at.
There is one exception to my typical gut, and it's always a gut thing. You never quite know if something's going to land or not.
And you have to roll the dice sometimes.
You have to roll the dice, and it's what we call the breadcrumb story.
So
if we've been covering some kind of major development or a company's arc, and there's a piece of news that by itself might not seem terribly important, we still might jump on that and write about it because we want to have it, because we think that sometime in the near to midterm, something important's going to happen with that company, and we're going to want to have that reference point along the way.
Exactly, and just to really nail that home, probably one of the first stories that I'm like, is this for Game Daily that I really had to consider was whether or not do we cover Starbreeze. And that's when Starbreeze was reporting, oh, they're doing really well, everything looks really good, but there's something weird going on here. Should we report on this? And so we kept reporting on it, and we have all of these breadcrumb stories on Game Daily now that talks about, what Starbreeze has been going through, and
and then they were rated by Swedish authorities, and we were glad we had all that stuff to refer back to.
It's true. So yeah, breadcrumb stories are important, especially on Game Daily. So if you guys have any other questions, you can come find us outside, but otherwise have a wonderful day.